Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I could not be more excited for you to get to experience this one-act play. My name is Jessica Schroeder. I'm the program director for the music department here at CSS. And I just wanted to introduce you to this event a little bit. This play was written by Vicki Fingalson, who is also acting in it and singing in it. She based this on the letters and the poetry of the Brontë sisters, and then she asked local composer Wendy Derwachter to set some of the poetry to music, which you'll hear interspersed throughout the play. Vicki is an educator, an avid performer. She teaches across the bridge at UWS. And Wendy is a local composer with several commissions lately by the DSSO, Matinee Musicale, and Schubert Club. So we're so lucky to have them here with us today. They will be doing a Q&A after the performance, so please stick around and let us know what questions you have. Thank you so much for being here.
In 1820, as Papa was appointed to a perpetual curacy at St. Michael's and All Angels Church. I was 4 years old, and with my parents and siblings, Maria, Elizabeth, Branwell, Emily Jane, and baby Anne, settled into our new home. The life expectancy was 25. Runoff from the graveyard, coupled with deplorable sanitary conditions, left to illness-fueled and loss, a daily endurance. Mama was first, and at 5 years old, I barely remember it, or her. Papa was left with 6 children to care for, So he sent for Mother's sister, Aunt Elizabeth, to care for us until another wife could be secured, which never did come to pass. 3 years after my mother's death, Papa sent Maria and Elizabeth off to school, followed soon by me and Emily. He did everything he could to support and promote our education and talents. So the clergy daughters' school at Cowan Bridge seemed like an answered prayer for Papa. An affordable education for his daughters. But the reality of it was far different than expected. It was damp and dank, situated in a low valley where there was little heat in winter and little fresh and clean air in the summertime. We crowded into dormitories with barely enough food to eat, and what was there was nearly inedible. There was sickness everywhere, and yet our endless routine of lessons continued uninterrupted. We all suffered and experienced deprivation we had never before experienced. Maria died first, then Elizabeth. Within the span of 3 months, we watched as our 2 eldest sisters were taken away, never to see them again. So concerned after his 2 eldest daughters had succumbed to such terrible sickness, Papa returned to retrieve me and Emily, hoping to save us from their same fate. Suddenly, at the age of 8, I had become the eldest, responsible for my 3 remaining siblings. Papa, Aunt Elizabeth, and even Tabby the housekeeper took on the task of our education, though we remained largely self-directed. We didn't need much, for at our fingertips we had the moors, our vast playground, merely steps from our back door, open access to Papa's library, the rich tales of the parsonage visitors, Tabby's vivid storytelling, but ultimately we had each other. One day, Papa bought Bronwell some wooden soldiers at Leeds. When he came home, it was night and we were in bed. So next morning, Bronwell comes to our door with a box of soldiers. Emily and I jumped out of bed, and I snatched up one and said, "This shall be the Duke of Wellington. This is the Duke." Each of us selected our own hero from the set, and with them, acted out and created elaborate plays, eventually creating a whole new imaginary world modeled upon what we imagined London to be, called Glasstown. We would write in these books so tiny that they couldn't be read by Papa with his diminishing eyesight. We had such fun with our stories, which often seemed to intertwine with our real life, frequently using our characters to poke fun at one another. Those were joyous years. When Papa became ill, we were reminded that if he were to pass, the parsonage, our home, would immediately go to the next curate in his family. Therefore, it was decided that we would again need a formal education, since as girls, we only had one option: to be teachers or governesses. Rowhead School was found, and there I flourished. It was nothing like Cowan Bridge. The other students thought me a bit odd, but I did manage to build a bit of a following for my ability to tell thrilling stories. I even developed lasting friendships in Ellen Nussey and Mary Taylor, with whom I would often engage in discussions and arguments about many subjects. In the end, I received 3 medals for my achievements for each of the terms in residence, as well as the French prize. Upon my return home, I did little writing except for the letters I wrote to Mary and Ellen. In the mornings, from 9 o'clock until 12:30, I instruct my sisters and draw. Then we walk until dinner. After dinner, I sew till tea time, and after tea I read, write, or do a little fancy work. At 9 o'clock each evening, Papa retires for the night, stopping halfway up the stairs to wind the clock. My days were filled, and yet, in the solitude of our wild little hill village, I became restless until the headmistress of Rowhead, Miss Wooler, asked me to return as a teacher. I was saddened at the thought of leaving home, but duty, necessity, these are stern mistresses who shall not be disobeyed. This time, Emily came with, enrolling as a student, but soon her homesickness took a significant toll on her health. My sister Emily loved the moors. Flowers, brighter than the rose, blossomed in the blackest of heath for her. Out of a sullen hollow in a livid hillside, her mind could make an Eden. Liberty was the breath of Emily's nostrils. Without it, she would perish. I couldn't bear the change from my own unartificial, unrestricted mode of life to that of a school with a disciplined routine. This is what I failed to endure. Every morning I woke, visions of home in the moors rushed at me and darkened and saddened the day that lay before me. No one but Charlotte knew what ailed me. She felt I might die if I did not go home, so after only 3 months, she obtained my recall. Anne replaced me at Rowhead. Dearest Anne. She was far better suited for study away. She was more compliant and obedient than I. With a resolute determination, she felt things deeply but balanced those with careful thought. Charlotte was growing more and more discontented with teaching, and at times could hardly suppress her rage at what she called the idleness, the apathy, and the hyperbolic and most asinine stupidity of the pupils in her charge. Just after Christmas, she wrote to the poet laureate, Robert Southey, for advice on her writing, hoping that this may be her way out of teaching. Several months later, his reply made its way to Rowhead and is kept in her writing box with the inscription, Southey's advice to be kept forever. Literature cannot be the business of a woman's life, and it ought not to be. The more she is engaged in her proper duties, the less leisure she will have for it, even as an accomplishment and a recreation. Perhaps she kept it both as a reminder of our obligations and a challenge to them. We all felt bound by duty in one way or another, duty to God, duty to family, duty to support ourselves. But it was duty to the current social constructs that we resisted. I had no wish to be a teacher, and yet I was offered and accepted a position to teach at Law Hill School in Halifax. The experience away from home and the long hours of unbearable work took its toll, and I became fragile in body and spirit. So I returned home, where I had unrestricted freedom and access to the things I loved most: writing, music, and the moors. A little while, the weary task is put away, and I can sing, and I can sing. Anne became seriously ill. Charlotte blamed Miss Wooler for not recognizing the extent of her illness, so as a result, Charlotte, stoic, stubborn, and strong-willed, resigned her appointment, and they both returned home. In spring 1839, Charlotte and I sought governess posts. I spent 9 months with the Inghams at Lake Hill, but the conditions were unbearable, so I returned home. Charlotte's appointment was temporary, which was a blessing. Try as she might, being a governess did not suit her, for habits of subservience did not come easily. Charlotte felt very strongly that a governess has no existence and is not considered a living and rational being except as connected with the wearisome duties a governess has to endure. While at home, Emily and I buried ourselves in our imaginary world of Gondal until I answered another governess post. This time, I spent 5 years with the Robinsons at Thorpe Green and grew to tolerate the appointment and loved the girls in my care. I believe that my fondness for children allowed me to connect with them in ways different from my sisters, and perhaps my quiet determination and self-control allowed me to suffer through some of the indignities a governess has to endure. With the Robinsons, I spent summer holidays at Scarborough and cherished these moments by the sea. Even so, thoughts of home were never far from mind. Blessed be thou for all the joy my soul has felt today. Oh, let this memory stay with me and never pass away. I was alone, And children were growing, and soon would have no need for a governess. So my sisters and I began talking about opening a school, but this would require further education. Charlotte's persistent and persuasive nature secured a commitment from Aunt Elizabeth to fund a trip for her and Emily to study in Brussels. But she wouldn't rest until she also got Papa's consent, so she wrote a letter to Aunt Elizabeth seeking additional assistance. Papa will perhaps think it a wild and ambitious scheme, but whoever rose to the world without ambition? When he left Ireland to go to Cambridge University, he was as ambitious as I am now. I want us all to go on. I know we have talents, and I want them to be turned to account. I look to you, Aunt, to help us. In February 1842, Emily and I were off to Brussels for 6 months of study. It was a large school with about 40 day pupils and 12 boarders. Madame Auger, the headmistress, was much like Miss Wooler, though the severe points were a bit softened. I was 26, and at that ripe old time of life became again a schoolgirl, and on the whole was happy in that capacity. But it felt very strange at first to submit to authority rather than exercising it. Emily and I were outsiders, as we were much older than the other pupils, and Protestant to their Catholic religious beliefs. And yet, it was a stimulating environment, made even more so by Monsieur Auger, who taught us French and was the head of the boys' school. He indulged and fueled my desire to argue, discuss, and challenge in a manner that made me feel as though we were on equal footing. Emily secluded herself, viewing social intercourse a waste of time. Even so, it seemed Monsieur Auger was intrigued and impressed by her ability to philosophize, to see life and events from a different perspective. I recall him writing to me of her on one occasion. She has a head for logic and a capability of argument unusual in a man and rare indeed in a woman. She should have been a man, a great navigator. Her powerful reason would have deduced new spheres of discovery from knowledge of the old, and her strong, imperious will would never have been daunted by opposition or difficulty. But again, I noticed the toll that being away from home had taken on her. Once more, she seemed sinking, but this time she rallied through mere force of resolution. With inward remorse and shame, she looked on her former failure and resolved to conquer this second ordeal. She did conquer, but the victory cost her dear. She was never happy until she carried her hard-won knowledge back to the remote English village, the old parsonage house, and the desolate Yorkshire hills. When we learned of Aunt Elizabeth's illness, we hurried home, but were too late. I took comfort in being home, and yet I was eager to accept Monsieur Auger's offer of a teaching post upon my return. Emily was extended a similar offer, but chose instead to stay where everything she needed and valued resided. Charlotte's return to Brussels, Branwell's invitation to join Anne at Thorpe Green to tutor the Robinson boy, and Aunt Elizabeth's passing left only me and Papa at home. Things were quiet and peaceful.
When weary with the
In January, Charlotte returned home after a disappointing return to Brussels, where she seemed to have experienced a mental and physical breakdown after her meetings with Monsieur Auger abruptly ended. Eventually, Anne came home, having resigned her appointment when she discovered that Branwell had been indiscreet with Mrs. Robinson. Not surprisingly, Branwell returned shortly thereafter, having been dismissed, and soon found himself in a downward spiral from his addictions. When Anne and Charlotte began distancing themselves from Branwell, I became his keeper. Charlotte was especially cold toward him. In a world where women have no means to escape our trials and often suffer enormously as a result, she saw in Branwell a man self-medicating his escape with such frequency that it brought pain to father and disgrace on the entire family. Life at the parsonage was heavy, each day turning to the next with hardly a distinctive mark. Emily was content with the quiet and routine, but Charlotte longed to travel, to work, to live life. One autumn day, Charlotte stumbled upon a book of Emily's poetry. The discovery was just what she needed to pull her out of her misery. She was moved by the power and musicality of Emily's words, calling them wild, melancholy, and elevating, and that they stirred in her heart like a sound of a trumpet. Charlotte confronted Emily with the discovery and suggested they try to find a publisher, but Emily was furious. It took hours to reconcile the discovery and days to convince her that her poems merited publication. In a quiet moment, I showed my secret poems to my sisters. This seemed to soften Emily a little bit. So cautiously, we agreed to seek publishers for select poems by each of us. After many rejections, the publishers Aylott and Jones agreed to publish select poems by each of us. But it was only at our expense, so we used Aunt Elizabeth's inheritance. Charlotte negotiated the terms, and since we were averse to personal publicity, we veiled our names under those of Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell. We did not like to declare ourselves women, for we had the vague impression that authoresses were liable to be looked on with prejudice. Only 2 copies sold. But we did get what we had hoped, 3 reviews, one of which was acclamatory. The review in the critic read, "It is a long time since we have enjoyed a volume of such genuine poetry as this, amid the heaps of trash and trumpery in the shape of verses which lumber the table of the literary journalist. This small book of some 170 pages only has come like a ray of sunshine, gladdening the eye with present glory and the heart with promise of bright hours in store." With publication and a positive critical review in hand, we each set out to write our novels. It was at home that our creativity flourished. We delighted in returning to our childhood routine of reading and writing and reading aloud around the table discussing plot and narrative. When we had finished our novels, we set out to find publishers of fiction. Again, after many rejections, London's T.C. Newby agreed to publish My Agnes Grey and Emily's Wuthering Heights. They rejected Charlotte's The Professor, but it came with just enough encouragement to fuel her determination to finish her second novel, Jane Eyre. With this, she received immediate publication with London's Smith and Elder. Of course, by now, Papa had heard of Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell, but did not know that we were they. Emily and I persuaded Charlotte to tell Papa of our literary accomplishments. So she went right into his study with a copy of Jane Eyre and a few newspaper reviews in hand. What started out as confusion and disbelief soon turned into pride and the relief that we may now be able to support ourselves. Various rumors and misunderstandings began to swirl about the authors of our novels, including that the Bell brothers were one person. We had no choice but to travel to London and sit face to face with Charlotte's publisher, George Smith, and tell him that there are indeed 3 authors, and that we are women. So in July, Charlotte and I set out on our journey to dispel the myth once and for all. They did not know we were coming, and they did not know whether we were women or men, but had always written to us as men. After we had asked to see Mr. Smith, we waited a while looking at some books, many of which were acclamatory, or many of which were familiar to us. At last, someone came up to Charlotte and said, "Did you wish to see me, madame?" "Is it Mr. Smith?" she said, peering through her spectacles. "It is," said the tall young gentleman standing before us. In no time, we had told him everything. What followed was a flurry of social events and meeting people. Unremarkable and plain as we were, we must have seemed odd to the fancy people to whom we were introduced, because we insisted that only our publishers be privy to our true identities. The entire trip was a lot for us to take in, constant activity for more than 24 hours. But the excitement from our trip to London soon faded, and I had no idea the season of loss and grief before me. In September, Branwell died of consumption. The warning signs were likely disguised by his significant addictions. After years of growing distance between us, I began to reflect on and pity my brother. I felt, as I had never felt before, that there was peace and forgiveness for him in heaven. All his errors, all his vices, seemed nothing to me in that moment. Every wrong he had done, every pain he had caused, vanished. His sufferings only were remembered. He is at rest. Life had no happiness for him. Just a week after Branwell's funeral, Emily caught a cold from which she never recovered. She sank rapidly. She made haste to leave us. Yet while physically she perished, mentally she grew stronger than we had yet known her. Day by day, when I saw with what affront she met suffering, I looked upon her with an anguish of wonder and love. I had seen nothing like it, but indeed, I have never seen her parallel in anything. Stronger than a man, simpler than a child, her nature stood alone. She refused medical help until the very last day, when she agreed to see a doctor, but it was too late. Emily Jane Brontë, the closest person to my heart in this world, died at 2:00 in the afternoon, the 19th of December, 1848. Over Christmas, Anne, too, became ill, and in January was diagnosed with consumption, just like Branwell and Emily. Anne besieged me to take her to the sea on several occasions, but I could not fathom it. I could not reconcile that by doing so, I may either be preventing her from getting well or conceding that she would not. Ultimately, under the counsel of a doctor, the consent of Papa, and Anne's growing resentment with my delay, Ellen Nussey and I took Anne to the sea in May, to her beloved seaside resort in Scarborough. Anne was so pleased to give us guidance as to which sights to experience, but she was often too ill to leave the room herself. At her insistence, we left her by the window for short periods of time while we explored the beauties of the coastal village. But the day that I could not escape finally arrived. Seeing me barely able to control my grief, Anne whispered, "Take courage, Charlotte. Take courage." Anne died on the 28th of May, 1849. She died without struggle, resigned, trusting in God. She believed. Anne's quiet Christian death did not rend my heart like Emily Stern's simple, undemonstrative end did. I let Anne go to God and felt he had a right to her. I could barely let Emily go. I wanted her back then, and I want her back now. They are both gone. And so is poor Branwell. And Papa now has only me. The weakest, puniest, least promising of his 6 children. Why life is so blank, brief, and bitter, I do not know. To see the shade of death. Oh, those beloved features cast. To me, these 2 have left in their memories a noble legacy. Were I quite solitary in the world, bereft even of Papa, there is something in the past I can love intensely and honor deeply. And it is something which cannot change, which cannot decay, which immortality guarantees from corruption. Their short lives were spotless. Their brief career was honorable. A year ago, had a prophet warned me how I should stand in June 1849. How stripped and bereaved. Had he foretold the autumn The winter, the spring of sickness and suffering to be gone through, I should have thought. This can never be endured. It is over. Branwell, Emily, Anne are gone like dreams. Gone like Maria and Elizabeth went 20 years ago. One by one, I have watched them fall asleep on my arm and closed their glazed eyes. I have seen them buried, one by one. And thus far, God has upheld me. but I have some thoughts and some knowledge about those incredible women nonetheless. So feel free to, yeah.
I'm completely wondering about your process.
Oh, well, this piece is the product of a sabbatical that I took 2 years ago. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was thinking about taking a sabbatical. I'm going to get to you in just a second.
No, I'm glad you're telling us about this.
Wendy. But I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something because it was shortly after COVID, and you know, COVID was real hard on all of the things, and I was feeling really burnt out. So I thought, gosh, I think now's the right time for me to take a sabbatical. And I knew that I wanted to create something. And since most of what I do is on stage, I thought creating something for the stage seemed like a reasonable thing for me to consider. And then I decided I wanted to do something that was super flexible, that could be done with one person and a piano or an orchestra. So I just knew I wanted it to be flexible and to be on stage. So then I thought, gosh, what about 19th century poets, but female poets? So I thought that's a great place to start, because wouldn't it be cool if I could commission somebody, Wendy Durwachter, to write some songs that could be a part of this thing that I wanted to write. So of course, what did I do? I Googled, sorry about that. And the very first thing that came up was the Brontë sisters. And I was gobsmacked because I had no idea that they were also poets. And I went down the longest rabbit hole in history and discovered very, very early on that I really was drawn to these women and really felt a connection to them and loved them almost instantly. And so I never looked at any other poets, and there are a lot of really wonderful female poets from the 19th century, but oh boy, did the Brontes speak to me. So during my sabbatical, I went to England, then I did some writing. I decided on the arc of the story. I chose all their poems to fit within the narrative. And then it came time, Wendy's time, to join in the process after I had selected all the poems. And we had spoken, when the sabbatical project was just sort of in its infancy. And I said, Wendy, you're my first choice. Do you want to do this? And she said, sure. Yeah. So I essentially wrote the play, and then I gave her the poems that I landed on for this piece. And then she created Anne, Emily, and Charlotte from there. I gave her a list of personality traits of each of the sisters, hoping that that might help inform what colors and the harmonic structure of each of their individual pieces. And so each of the sisters would sound kind of like themselves. And I can talk more about that later if you want, but I feel like I've exhausted this part of the equation. So does that answer your question, Anne? Yeah. Okay. I worked during my sabbatical every single day. Dean Dons, I see you sitting out there. Thank you for being here. Every single day I had a schedule. I did go to the gym in the mornings, but then after the gym, then I spent 3 to 4 hours writing and researching every day, because I would never get an opportunity like that again, where I would just have dedicated time to something like this. So I took advantage of it. Other questions? Yes, Sam? How did I get the little papers with the words in the book? Well, in my time and in your time, Sam, we have something called a computer. And it did wonders for me and gave me some bright writing to have on the papers, so it would not only inform me in case I would forget something, but also inform you all, so perhaps you could see that they were indeed writing something. I didn't want to have just blank pieces of paper. I wanted their poems on these sheets of paper. That was a good question, Sam. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Hi, Sarah.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
First of all, how did you narrow all of that material down to a 55-minute play/song cycle/epic journey?
Uh-huh.
And how did you happen upon the physical expressions for each of the three? Obviously, Emily had the glasses.
Charlotte.
Charlotte
Yeah, yeah.
had the glasses.
Yeah.
And Emily had an itch, and Anne had a handkerchief.
Uh-huh.
But how did you come up with those? So those two questions.
Okay.
How did you narrow the
Yeah, yeah.
scope, and how did you come up with their physical?
The hardest part of the process was narrowing it down. I knew that if it was a piece that I was going to do by myself, that I needed it to be a manageable bite. And I set out to write a 45-minute show. And I cut and cut and cut and got to what I thought was a 50-minute show, and I thought, okay, that's okay. And then when we started putting it all together, it turned into a 55-minute show, which is okay. But that was the hardest part. Part of it was driven by a natural dramatic arc. As an actor, I like highs and lows, because if there are some highs, then the lows feel heavier. And that's just satisfying for an actor. And also, hopefully, it's satisfying for an audience to get to experience a variety of emotions. So it was about having the right balance of chronological, historical information, and also finding poetry that would match with the same year or event of the situations I decided to highlight in the piece. So it was a combination of that, but that was the hardest piece because, as you know, there's so much. Their lives were so full and complex, and I could have written a 4-hour show, but then I wouldn't have been able to do all of that by myself, and that would have been tricky. Incidentally, this show can be done by 3 singers too, and nothing has to change, which was my goal, to have it be that flexible. And Wendy and I, speaking of, Wendy and I are going to travel to Concordia College in September and do a 3-person version. I'll be Charlotte, and I will coach 2 and direct 2 singers from their school to be Anne and Emily. And so that will be yet another sort of way this piece is being presented. So there was another question.
Yeah, the glasses that
There is a remarkable wealth of existing letters that give a really good insight into their personalities. And so I verbally told some of the personality traits within the piece, but I also had to find a physicality that sort of matched. Emily did wear glasses. She had very, very poor eyesight. Charlotte. See, you and I both did that. I know. Charlotte had very poor eyesight, much like their father. And so glasses was a no-brainer. Emily was painfully shy and actually didn't like people except her family. She liked to be in the moors with animals or at home with her family, and that's it. And she never looked people in the eye, or rarely did. And so I tried to give her a physicality that was more closed off and sort of lowered my gaze when I could. And Anne was the most feminine and delicate and well-liked of the three sisters. Charlotte and Emily weren't very well-liked. But Anne was universally liked by anybody who met her. And so I tried to make her sort of bright and effervescent a little bit. And I thought, oh, a lacy handkerchief. And that will remind me which sister I am at that moment. So it was kind of a selfish thing too, because I needed something to remind me.
It helped us too.
Oh, good, thank you. Yes.
I want to hear something from Wendy about what it was like to have you describe these three people and then try to put that to specific music that would capture those traits.
Yeah, it was so fun, and Vicki did such a great job telling me about their personalities and giving me a lot of the research that she had, or telling me a lot about them from her research, and then handed me the poems. And so I went home. I guess I just kind of sat with it all for a while. That's usually how I write with words. I started with the first song, but I didn't like what I wrote, and so I set that aside. It just didn't seem right, and so I did 2, 3, and 4 pretty quickly, actually, and I really just played the melody that she sang on the piano. Maybe I sang it, good thing no one was around, and a bass line. And they actually sounded like very simple songs, and then I added elaborate things to give more character to the piece. But as I was working on them, I realized that the character of the women really, of each person, came out in their poetry. And it was interesting because she told me that Emily was really shy, but the 2 poems that were selected, her poems, the songs really had to soar with the words that they were really, I don't know, they're just so imaginative and soaring that we both kind of talked about it afterward. I said, I don't know if I captured her character, but I think you affirmed that she was always like that in her writing. It's like her true sense of self came out in her writing, and it was a really more outgoing version of her, I think, right? And then after I wrote all 2 through 6, and we knew that 7 should be similar to 1, so that was where I wrote that one. So it was nice to have the rest written. I wrote it based on knowing what I'd already written, and it just kind of came out.
Yeah, Wendy landed on Emily and Anne really quickly, and both of us struggled with Charlotte, finding the right sound for Charlotte, and then eventually sort of the last pass of Charlotte's 2 pieces. Once I heard them, I thought, oh, I think we've got it. I think we've got it.
Yeah.
So it all worked.
And do you think about when Vicki's, you have to break down her range and think about the color of her voice and like as an instrument, like as with her or oboe or something.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really interesting to me. Do you go back and forth with it?
We did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in fact, the second song I wrote in D flat, which she sang originally in D flat really beautifully, but we thought, this is a really taxing show. Let's do C, and the students want the key of C. So, it actually transposed really well.
Wendy has strong feelings about certain keys, and there were certain keys that I suggested, and she was like, oh, but I don't like that key.
For the imagination, for the song number 4, the imagination one, she wanted the key of F, and I said, oh, I really don't like the key of F, except then I remember that some of the songs that are the warmest feeling to me are are written in the key of F, and so it actually worked really well.
Yes.
Yeah, were you drawn to one of the sisters over the others?
I get asked that with some frequency, and my answer has changed over time. I'm intrigued by different elements of them. I think given all that Charlotte had to endure, I appreciate her kind of the most. And I think I'm drawn to Charlotte. But there are elements of each that I really, really am taken by. I love the fact that Emily's true self comes out in her art. I love the fact that Charlotte was very persistent, and also she's so interesting. She honestly felt that she was not as smart as all of her siblings, and she thought herself to be very ugly. She was very short. She was shorter than 5 feet tall. And she didn't have a lot of self-confidence, but she persisted because I believe she had something in her that was just driving. And she knew she had something to offer, but she didn't know what it was. And so she just kept at it until probably Jane Eyre sort of came to fruition, and then sort of we're seeing her in kind of her best sort of moments. She ended up writing or having published 3 novels. Anne had 2 published, and Emily only had The Wuthering Heights. Steve, did you have a question?
That's the same question.
Oh!
I'm curious to know which one you would pick by. If you had to save the world with Brontë sisters, would you buy?
Oh, for sure, Charlotte. Absolutely, Charlotte. Absolutely, Charlotte.
This is a composition question for the songs. Did you have a strong feeling about any one of the sisters in terms of like colors, or I'm just sort of curious because they really do each have their own language and color and feeling. I mean, I think the thing that I'm most taken by in Charlotte's is that it continues to sort of whine. So you can hear her thinking and turning over and reflecting. They just whine, especially 1 and 7. They kind of whine, and you get the benefit later on. But was that, how much of a consideration was that?
Well, I think, and you'll know, I can't remember the first line, but you know it. It talks about a web. A web, and we spun a web in childhood. And to me, that line just summed up everything they were doing. And so my first version of that was also kind of a winding thing. That was a concept I really wanted to do. But yeah, absolutely, Charlotte's mind was always, the wheels were always turning. And so, yeah, I guess when I write, I really get into the character of the poem and kind of just let it overtake me. But for this, it was really especially fun to, well, I guess any poet I do, I try to get into the character of the poet. I read a lot about them, and but you provided me a lot, kind of a cheat sheet of characteristics, which really was helpful because as I was writing, I would have that up on the piano, and I would just kind of look at it a little bit here and there.
Do you have a favorite song?
I'm pretty attached to all of them. I guess the 6th one, the really sad one. I love the chords, but I also love the imagination one. I think I had the most fun writing Emily's songs.
Yeah.
Both of you, whoever wants to go first. Thank you, John.
Did you visit the Yorkshire area since
Sure did.
people are so much a part of the place?
Sure did.
You
I spent a few days in Haworth and went to the parsonage, the museum, took a hike in the moors, so I could really envision place and how it feels. And I got to see their home. I got to see the dining room where they did all the writing. You know, I got to walk in it and see the table set similarly, you know, and I got to see the grandfather clock that was halfway up the stairs that, you know, the dad would wind every night. And I got to have that experience, and it was such a critical part, I think, of the process, more critical than I even thought. And when I'm up here, I can still see myself in that space, and I can feel the stone floor underneath my feet. And so, yeah, that was a really important part. Kathy, did you have a question too?
Has this piece been published?
No, not yet.
So it's not available for use by others yet. Are you looking to, the two of you kind of tour with it? Or?
That is our hope and wish. We're also really busy, and so we haven't pursued it like we want to, because we have a lot of other things on our plate. That, once we completed it, I think we thought, oh gosh, I really like it. I really want to be able to share this in as many ways possible, which is why we're going to go to Concordia and do a residency there for students and their community, and we're hoping to do more of that. It just is a matter of time and coordination and, you know, things like that. And it would be great for us to pursue publishing too, and I especially want Wendy to see if she can get the songs published. It's a song play, an art song play, which is a kind of an interesting new kind of form. And so it's hard for me to even know exactly where to start for that, which avenue to look at first. So that's on our brains, we just haven't fully jumped into the deep end.
Would be a good idea.
Thank you. Dean.
Yeah, come in, please. From the initial idea stage to the research, to the writing, to the performance rehearsals, did any of this put you out of your comfort zone?
Oh, that's a really good question, Nick. Yes, because there was a time in my life when I didn't think I was an actor. I thought I was a singer who just occasionally acted. And then, you know, over the last 30 years, because I'm that old, I've done more and more acting, and I kept getting like cast in things that would require me to act. And so it was daunting to know that I was writing myself a piece where I was saying 10 single-spaced pages of monologue, and presenting that and trying to be believable for my audience. Because the words are fine, but it needs to be believable for you all. And so that was a little bit of an old kind of hurdle that I had to get over, and recognize that I was going to write a show that I hoped audiences would learn something from, and want to seek out more information, and something that I also enjoyed doing and felt confident with. So there was a bit of a process there.
And I need to point out Vicki's remarkable role in this, that she was producer, grant writer, researcher, director, costume designer, set designer, actor, singer.
It was also pretty fun because I got to pull out all of the elements of music theater that I really love, and then also have an opportunity to create some new art songs, because that's art songs is also a really big part of my life and my students' life. So ultimately, it was just really incredibly rewarding to have my hands in all the places. It didn't really feel like work. It was just fun. Well, thank you all so very much for coming, and enjoy your weekend.